Mona Eltahawy is an Egyptian columnist and author and joins me now from New York. Mona has been following these protests very closely. Where do you see these protests now going?
Well, I see determination. I've been following friends and people I know in Tahrir Square throughout the day, and I know after the huge disappointment of what can only be described as a very sadistic speech by Hosni Mubarak, that people were tweeting, "We are not leaving Tahrir Square. Come and join us at the TV building and come and join us as we march on the presidential palace." Now remember, tomorrow, Friday, had been designated all along as a day of martyrs that was supposed to be this mass kind of open-air funeral for the 302, at least 302 people who have been killed during the peaceful pro-democracy demonstrations, killed by Mubarak thugs, essentially. So tomorrow was supposed to be a massive people were supposed to turn out in the masses, and I think now that will become even more urgent, because what you saw was a regime that knew that people were expecting a major announcement that had something to do with Mubarak stepping down, and Mubarak and Suleiman basically coming on the air and continuing this very delusional tone in which they address these thousands upon thousands of Egyptians like naughty children who should go home because their fathers are upset with them. And I think those so-called naughty children are going to show their fathers tomorrow that they're determined to finish this revolution.
Now, one of the interesting things that has been coming out throughout all of this is the role of media and new media in these protests. What do you think the internet, the web and television, we saw Omar Suleiman talk about satellite TV, has done for these protesters?
Well, we know that the uprising was initially launched online through social media, but it jumped off that virtual space and became very much so in the real space and galvanized millions of Egyptians to join. So I think, you've seen various kinds of media being used, but you've also seen the regime using the media, because as we heard your correspondent mention in Cairo just now, they've used it for quite effective propaganda. What worries me even more is how we've seen one after the other, Hosni Mubarak, Omar Suleiman, and yesterday the Egyptian foreign minister address the US media in tones, again, that can only be described as delusional. For example, yesterday, Ahmed Abul-Ghait, the Egyptian foreign minister, said we cannot possibly lift the emergency law in the way that the US Vice President Joe Biden is calling, because we have at least 7,000 prisoners out on the streets of Egypt, when it's the regime who pushed those prisoners out of jail. So I think that what you're seeing is every group involved in this revolution, be it on the regime side or the pro-democracy side, have been using media. And now, obviously, I'm on the side of the pro-democracy demonstrators, and what worries me is that the US media, we heard also how the Egyptian ambassador has been trying to use this ludicrous excuse of a translation. What I want to see is US journalists who have access to these regime officials just stop them in mid-sentence and say, "Are you kidding me?" and actually tell them that the reality of the street is very different. I mean, it's one thing to engage in Egyptian state media propaganda, but it's completely different when you have these regime officials addressing the US administration and the US public through media and through journalists who do not stop them and say this is a blatant lie, and who do not tell Omar Suleiman, for example, when he says Egyptians are not ready for democracy, that you have millions of Egyptians on the street demanding democracy and you are standing in their way.
Mona Eltahawy is an Egyptian columnist and author speaking to us from New York. Thank you so much for talking to us.